The UN General Assembly on Monday adopted by a wide margin a global compact on refugees aimed at improving efforts to manage large refugee movements, but without the support of the United States and Hungary. The refugee pact, which did not provoke the controversy unleashed over a similar pact on migration, was approved by 181 countries. Only two voted no, the US and Hungary. Three others abstained, the Dominican Republic, Eritrea, I've never heard of them before, and Libya. Much like the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration, the Refugee Pact is not legally binding. The two global agreements stem from the so-called New York Declaration adopted unceremoniously by the UN General Assembly in September 2016 with the goal of better handling migrant and refugee flows worldwide. The compact, written under the auspices of the Geneva-based UN Refugee Policy, UNHCR, hopes to ensure an adequate international response to large-scale refugee movements and extended displacement of refugees. So that's enough of that story. I don't like reading from the story itself because a lot of people will get turned off. Oh, you're just copying something from a script. So the significance of that vote, if the person who came in here was here earlier, for the beginning of me reading that, is that out of 183 countries that voted on that particular pact, which was having to do with migration, the U.S., the United States, was one of only two countries out of 183 who voted that just said no, we're not doing that one. And I've a lot of times defended Trump because I talk about the policies of his that people now get pissed at that were here before, like immigration and all that. But I've noticed what seems to be kind of a recurring pattern of basically anything that has to do with an international body. The U.S. is kind of fine just saying screw you too. Like during the U.S.'s help for Saudi Arabia and Yemen, we were selling them cluster bombs, and those are banned by international law. Now, this is again not a shot at Trump necessarily, although he's done it as well. But under Obama and him, we just said, hey, what do you mean we're violating what the rest of the world thinks? Screw you, and decided to do that just to get more money. So that's another thing. But also, if you go back to last year with the Paris Agreement, and I'm forgetting the details of that agreement. I'm going to look into it, but I know that out of every country in the world, the U.S., Nicaragua, and maybe Saudi Arabia were the only ones who just were out of there, out of the entire world. And that's another thing that happened under Trump. That was in his first couple of months. And I remember he said that it was that he pulled out because it was a bad deal for the U.S. And I thought to myself, and this is why I don't like tribalism, because when you a lot of times feel that the person you like is being attacked by other people, you start to turn off your instinctive, I guess, critical thinking skills. So pretend, you're a neutral person. This is a Democrat, this whatever party you affiliate with, they're in the White House, and they pull out of this agreement and they say it's bad for the U.S. Do you really believe that all of the other countries in the world got together to screw you over, your particular country over, with some deal that everyone else said, yeah, this is good for us, but not for you? Does anyone really believe that? I know I don't. All right, so the Paris Agreement was dealing with greenhouse gas emissions mitigation, adoption, and finance. Starting in the year 2020, the agreement's language was negotiated by representatives of 196 state parties at the 21st conference of the parties of the UNFCCC in Le Bourget near Paris, France, and adopted by consensus on December 12, 2015. So that's during Obama's tenure. I'm just reading that because when I am reminded now, I'm thinking about the climate or the environmental policy of the Trump administration and how it's filled with a bunch of climate change deniers. And then when you go on TV, they tell you, they put up people who oppose it and people who like it evenly even though 97% of scientists agree on that existing, that human activity has an impact on the environment. So it just feels like such a simple thing that because that's one of the guiding philosophies of Republicans. I know that we just, of course, that was going to happen. The Iran deal, Trump criticized during the campaign. Let's see, believe it goes back. Or this little message someone sent me. But during the campaign, he was talking about how bad the Iran deal was, and it never appeared genuine to me. It was always this thing of just, well, the Republicans that are in office talk crap about it, so I'm gonna talk smack about it too, and hopefully I'll get their supporters to like me as well. Um, and that's kind of where you start seeing a lot of the flaws in the characters of these people, where they tell you that this deal that assures that I believe it was the IEEA, this international body goes over to Iran and checks out their nuclear weapons. They tell you that this deal is so horrible, and then lo and behold, months and months later, he pulled out of it back in, I believe, May or June. Guess how many countries besides the U.S. have left that deal? Not a single one. So it's the rogue state. That's just what the U.S. is at this point. I've given you multiple examples now of how we, in the last 2 years, we've had this thing of just pulling out of agreements and deals and negotiations that the rest of the world seems content to keep up with. And I thought that maybe in the case of a couple of Republicans, like, Rand Paul, for example, who admitted after opposing the Iran deal that they haven't done anything to violate it, you would get more people who would say, you know what, this isn't the right way to go about things. But when you have tribalism, they're going to keep ignoring, just thinking independently about stuff. And it's really unfortunate because when we have things like what's happening with the U.S. and North Korea, where they meet and you think, oh, they're going to have peace, and then they have these new sanctions put on North Korea, the U.S. Treasury Department. People a lot of times will say, oh, well, that's, you're hearing their side of it. What about our side? And so you go, okay, well, that's kind of fair because it's 50-50. This is the rest of the world basically saying to us, this is a good agreement, a good deal. And then whoever's in charge going, no. And unfortunately, that's been Trump more instances in these last 2 years than Obama in his entire 8. And I do think that whenever you have treaties that are made by a president or some leading official in the country, the person who succeeds them should stay in it. If Trump made a treaty with North Korea that said we will not go to war with each other ever under circumstances pertaining to you attacking us, then we might revoke this. If he did that, I would want the Democrat who comes after him, and there will eventually be one. That's just how politics works. To stay in it. Now I'm trying to remember what treaty it was that we had for 30 years, and then George W. pulled out of. Let me look it up. I'm also trying to charge my phone, but I'm not sticking the charger in there properly. So you're gonna have to forgive me when you start hearing the little smack on the ground and everything. Let's see here. For the arms treaty, that's START one. That was actually, this isn't the correct treaty I was looking for, but it does illustrate a good example of what different presidents of different parties and I guess different decades and whatever should do in the instance of having these treaties. So the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, also known as START, was a bilateral treaty between the U.S. and the USSR on the reduction and limitation of strategic offensive arms. It was signed on July 31st, 1991, during the George H.W. Bush administration. And I'm trying to see if I can find where Obama signed the new version of that. Now, again, I have problems with Obama, as I've illustrated on here, but actually staying in deals, I have to give him credit for. So let's see if I can find it. It was called, I think, START 2 or New START. Here it is. Okay, New START is a nuclear arms reduction treaty between the U.S. and the Russian Federation that was signed on April 8th, 2010, and after ratification entered into effect on February 5th, 2011, and is expected to last until 2021. So I actually forgot all about when that was going to expire. But if Trump is in office when that thing goes off, I'm about 99% sure he's going to rip it up. I know a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, he's having better relations with Russia than Obama did," which automatically starts up that they interfere in the election thing. Look, he's already shown that if there's a deal that we have or have had, he's going to rip it up, and he's going to trust the instincts of his little advisors over that of the rest of the world. Again, as a guiding philosophy, you have to ask yourself, do these fools in suits have more brains put together than all of these other countries and their various intellectuals? I would go with the latter if I was in his position. But unfortunately, we have a lot of warmongers in the GOP, and even if Trump himself isn't one, he surrounded himself by a bunch of them. Let's not forget during the North Korea summit, or in the lead up to it, rather, you had Bolton go on TV and talk about when to use the Libya model. Basically trying to blow it up before it even started. And that's significant because it shows you there's such a different, I guess, wanting from the person who's all the way at the top, which is Trump, and then the people who are beside him or on the sides of him. And in a lot of instances, when I see stuff like this refugee pact, being voted for by every single country except us and Hungary, it's not a coincidence to think maybe there's something wrong with the people at the top. And I've said before, the U.S. is governed by fools. It's run by idiots. If we get an actual peace deal with North Korea or with any of these other countries that Trump is trying to have a conflict with, which I'm going to say the only one I can actually see nothing changing on is Iran, just because we're too much in the pockets of Israel. But if he signs one, I want the Democrat who succeeds him, if there's one during this next presidential election or 2024, whatever, to stay in it. So at this point, the U.S. has turned into a partisan mockery of its former self. And in conclusion, I think that whenever you have people who are more concerned about looking cool to their voting base than actually doing what's right on the international stage, you're headed for a disaster. Like I said, the people try to always say that Trump is the beginning and bringer of all the evil stuff, which I don't believe, and I've disputed since he first came into office. But he is original in the sense of pulling out of pretty much any deal and agreement he can possibly find himself having to do with. And it's really sad because the legacy of his tenure is going to be, let's not sign any more agreements with the U.S. Why would we? We're just going to get it revoked by whoever is of the opposing party when they take office. And I'm leaning toward just saying whenever a Republican gets in, they're going to shred it up, because the treaty that Nixon had with the Soviet Union, we had that for 30 years before George W. got in office and tore it up. Same thing with the START Treaty, where signed by a Republican, HW, and then a Democrat decides to keep us in it. One of the few things I'll give him credit for. So I don't like playing little partisan attacks, and because I don't think any of us should be so attached to one party. But as far as ripping up agreements and trying to object from the rest of the world, it's all been done by Republicans for the most part. I am interested in seeing what this refugee pact does. I think it sounds interesting from what I read of it earlier. We're going to see its effect, obviously. It's just ironic that we'll have Trump go on TV tomorrow, or, whenever there's something else having to do with the UN, and talk about these other countries as if there's some big difference between us and the rest of them, when we all have the same basic things: a military, those in leadership, sometimes elected, sometimes not, and individuals who abstain from their government. I don't feel um, any more unpatriotic by saying that the U.S. was dumb to pull out of that agreement, because I'm talking about the people who are at the top. The people at the top are idiots. U.S. is governed by fools. But when I say that, that doesn't mean that everyone else who's here is an idiot. It means that the people at the top are doing stupid things that are going to have repercussions for those at the bottom, those with no power. The same thing with Israel. I talk about the Israeli government being awful, not Jews or Israelis. But again, they use this kind of coded language to try and trick people into thinking that someone is saying something that they're not, so that they can smear them and get them to be shamed into silence. So you look at what happened with Noam Chomsky and him being called unpatriotic because he doesn't bootlick for either party. So I have to give the Democrats credit for staying in the agreements. I hope the Republicans follow their lead. I doubt it. The only time you'll ever get one of them to stay in anything is if one of them started it, or um, that's about it. Probably just if their party starts something, they'll keep it. But if they don't, then they get rid of it. So thank you.